250 years. A commemoration of the 4th of September, 1776, in the valley of the Pigeon River, Haywood County, North Carolina. From the Institute for Natural Philosophy, Indigenous Mound Research Center. Garden Creek lies in Haywood County, North Carolina, about 2 miles southwest of Canton, on a terrace above the Pigeon River where the mountains open into both homeland. 3 mounds stand on that ground. They are far older than the anniversary this film marks. The people who raised them were building here for centuries, before any European army came up the valley, and their descendants are here still. The year 1776 is not the beginning of Garden Creek. It is 1 September in a much longer occupation, and it is remembered because it was violent. On the 4th of September, 1776, the column commanded by General Griffith Rutherford crossed the Pigeon River. The North Carolina Office of Archives and History places that crossing at the confluence of the East and West Forks. 250 years later, that is the anniversary that falls. The strongest locator for that crossing is not a narrative. It is a land patent. North Carolina Land Grant Number 1260, issued to John and Joseph McDowell on the 27th of November, 1789, describes 320 acres on the Pigeon River, and I give the instrument's own words, about 3 miles down the river below where Rutherford's army crossed, including some Indian town houses. A state patent written 13 years after the campaign fixes the ford without depending on any memoir. It calls close to within 3% of the stated acreage, which means the tract can be plotted on the ground today. That tract passed in time to the Plot family, and it carries the Garden Creek Mounds. In 1916, George G. Hay published a measured plan of 3 mounds on the Plot Farms, 2 miles southwest of Canton. Hay recorded that the westernmost had been opened in 1880 by Man S. Valentine of Richmond. The deed language and the archaeology are describing the same ground. One correction belongs in any commemoration that means to be accurate. The Webb-Auld fight of the 19th of September, 1776, was Colonel Andrew Williamson's column, not Rutherford's. The error traces to David L. Twain in 1867 and was repeated by James Mooney. 150 years of repetition does not make it so. What happened in the valley has lately become testable rather than arguable. The research laboratories of archaeology at Chapel Hill hold more than 13,000 catalogued items from Garden Creek Mound Number 1. Among them, more than 30,000 pieces of burned wall clay. A box of charred structural beams. 10 lots of charred corn, including 1 cob with the kernels still attached. Lead shot. And a fused clinker lying within a deposit of ash and charcoal. A radiocarbon determination from the mound, 205 plus or minus 65 years, before present, bracket 1776. In 1833, a veteran named Robert Rankin swore that at Big Pigeon River his company burnt the huts and destroyed the corn. Both nouns of that sentence now have physical correlates in a federal repository, 3 miles below the ford the deed describes. Whether they belong to the same event is a question that radiocarbon and a thin section can answer. Neither has yet been asked. That is the ground. What follows is the record, how the material history of this valley was gathered, paid for, labeled, and in places lost. 7 adversities stand between us and a clean account. The first is competition. Between 1870 and 1920, 2 collecting models worked the same valleys for the same material. On one side, the federal and public model, the Smithsonian Institution and its Bureau of Ethnology, operating on appropriation, vouchers, registers, and published annual reports. On the other, the private and proprietary model, the Valentine Museum of Richmond and private collectors, operating on correspondence, register catalogs, and photographic plate series. Federal agents paid more. $5 for a bear, $4 for an image, against roughly $2 on the private side, and 50 or 25 cents by size. Mineral dealers, rival buyers, and hotel boarders pulled at the same supply. Competition raised expectations and speed overtook record. Provenience is the casualty in that trade. The second is policy. On the 30th of March, 1883, the Office of Indian Affairs issued the rules governing the Court of Indian Offenses, under commission or higher price. Rule 6 made the usual practices of so-called medicine men a cognizable Indian offense, punishable by confinement in the agency prison for not less than 10 days. Read the rule closely and note its limits. It does not mention carved images, idols, rainmaking objects, or the possession of objects. It names no Haywood County witness. What can be said is narrower, and therefore stronger. A positive statement of December 1880 predates the rule. The questioning of August 1883 follows it. Policy conditions may have affected what felt safe to say. That is context, not proof, and it should be carried as context. The third is the order of the record. In the National Archives, Record Group 217, account 237,177, the paper survives. Voucher 17, the 24th of April, 1883, $30 for ethnologic specimens. $28.50 paid to Burnett, and $1.50 for packing and shipping, receipted by John W. Emmert and certified by Cyrus Thomas as ethnologist. Voucher 40, the 21st of May and the 5th of June, $22 for soapstone specimens, with a separate seller sub-voucher itemizing 15 specimens at $1.46 and 2/3 each. On the verso, Spencer F. Baird certified that the articles had been received, that they were necessary for ethnologic researches, and that the prices paid were just and reasonable. The abstract of disbursements carries the signature of J. D. McChesney. The first auditor certified examination and adjustment on the 26th of July, recorded on the 27th, with comptroller action on the 31st. These signatures verify payment, receipt, date, and roll. They do not, by themselves, verify prehistoric manufacture or the authenticity of any object. That distinction is the whole discipline. The fourth is procured silence. Official correspondence of the 3rd of June, 1887, records an officer asking whether it was important to omit mention of the circumstances under which the articles were obtained. In a statement of the 10th of April, 1892, D. G. Valentine recorded that Emmert had promised the parties who manufactured objects that their names should not be made public. There is a difference between silence as absence and silence by agreement. The first may be nothing more than limited knowledge. The second is a record shaped by private promise. And the rule must run symmetrically. If names are withheld, they are withheld for buyer, middleman, and maker alike. The fifth is the collapse of record integrity, and here we have the document itself. On the 3rd of February, 1922, Neil M. Judd, curator of American archaeology, wrote to Dr. Ho that in attempting to bring some sort of order to the older records of the division, he had encountered a series of accessions that seemed well nigh hopeless. 5 accessions, all received from the Bureau of American Ethnology. 13,652, 669 specimens from mounds. 13,791, about 2,000 stone implements. 13,948, 108 specimens. 14,009, human bones from mounds in the United States, collected during 1883. And 14,255, 362 specimens. Judd recommended that the first 4 be cancelled and all their material recorded under accession 14,255. The memorandum was endorsed recommended, stamped the 4th of February, 1922, and annotated, change in records made. The sixth is the label. An evidentiary question, is this object ancient, modern, or inauthentic, was answered once with a word, and the word hardened into a permanent designation. Fake. Imitation. Bogus. Fraudulent antiquity. Across decades the term traveled from collector estate, to regional museum, to state museum, to university museum, copied forward into each new record. Institutions retained the objects rather than risk future confusion or obligation. In 1963 a curator counsel that such objects should never be sold, even as fakes, because buyers who later learned the truth would bring them back to museums with demands for explanations. The consequence is that the label outlived the evidence that produced it. A term inherited is not a judgment made. The seventh concerns records that touch the dead, and it is the one place in this account where I will say less rather than more. Of the 5 accessions Judd consolidated, only one was described without a specimen count. The one identified as human bones. Cancellation and consolidation are administrative tidying. Their effect here was to remove specific identification and context from the accession record. What is at stake is not a discovery to be announced. It is legibility, stewardship, and the order of operations. Consultation with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians Tribal Historic Preservation Office precedes any public identification of burial-associated material from this region. That is a standing rule of this research register, and it governs here. So this is what 250 years looks like from the Pigeon Valley. A deed that still locates a ford. A mound with burned clay, charred beans, corn, and lead shot in a federal repository. A radiocarbon date that brackets the year. A paper trail of vouchers, certifications, and settlements, honest about what it proves and what it does not. And a record thinned by competition, by policy, by secrecy, by consolidation, and by one careless word repeated for a century. Commemoration is not celebration. The 4th of September, 1776, was a day of burning in a Cherokee valley, and the people whose town stood there have descendants who are owed the first word about what remains. What we can offer on the anniversary is accuracy. A plotted tract. A graded finding. A named falsifier. And a question put in a form that can be answered. Institute for Natural Philosophy, Indigenous Mound Research Center. Vincent Barrows, Indigenous Mound Research Director. Source Finds and Corpus Compilation, Samantha Waddell. Sources: North Carolina Land Grant No. 1260, Hay, 1916, The Research Laboratories of Archaeology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. National Archives Record Group 217, Account 237,177, The Rules Governing the Court of Indian Offenses of 1883, and the Smithsonian Accession File for Accession 14255. 4th of September, 2026.